Welcome into another edition of the FutureSox RoundUp. My name is Elijah Evans, and I am joined, as always, I see the name tag is wrong right now, but now I am joined, as always, by my co-host, Jeff Cohen. We are back. We wanted to record this a little while ago. I've been a little busy. That's on me. Both Jeff and I were in Arizona at this point over a week ago, but we were there for a while, checking in on spring training, talking with a ton of minor league guys, talking to major league guys, coaches, development staff guys, really everything in between. So we were able to get a lot of good experience and content at spring training. Really just checking in with everyone, seeing kind of the ropes, seeing how everything was going in spring training, and then just trying to kind of figure out what the White Sox season is going to look like. I think that's where everybody's at right now. As we record this, we're 10 days out from opening day. Believe it or not, the offseason has flown by. It's almost time for baseball to start, and we're just fired up to start watching the White Sox, but also just start watching, everything in between and all of the minor leagues teams. We're going to get minor league rosters in the next 2 weeks or so, which is super exciting for us as we start to plan for, Jeff being in the Carolinas, being able to watch Kannapolis, Winston, and Charlotte, in addition to Birmingham, which I'm hoping to get out there at some point later this summer. But we'll see what happens. But yeah, Jeff, how are you doing? And how was your experience, your first time covering spring training?
Elijah, all good here. First and foremost, I want to thank you for encouraging me to join you in Arizona.
For
It
sure.
was a terrific experience. I appreciate all your guidance and keeping me on the straight and narrow out there and where I needed to be, when I needed to be. I will say to anyone who is listening to this, you're clearly a devoted White Sox fan. And if you are, anyone who is should go to Arizona for spring training. You've got amazing access. You don't need a media pass to be able to get to the backfields and watch all the minor leaguers and major leaguers practice. And it's just a lot of fun, very informal. Guys are friendly. They'll chat with you if they're not on needed to be somewhere else. So it's a great experience, and I would encourage everyone to consider doing it.
Yeah, I could not agree more. Spring training's awesome. I've been there as a fan for years. I've been there the past 3 seasons now, covering the team, which has been incredible. Very grateful to be able to do that with you in general. Meet all the people there, talk to guys, check in with players. Right, it's an amazing experience. It's one of the things I look forward to every year, and have been even when I used to go. I went to Camelback Ranch the year that it opened up when I was I think I was 5 or 6 years old with my family, just as a fan watching White Sox baseball. I met Clayton Richard that year, former White Sox. For anybody who knows super niche White Sox players, Clayton Richards was a Sox player back in the day. I met him at the hotel that I was staying at, and for me, that's one of my earliest childhood memories, honestly. So spring training is a special place for me, for a lot of people. It's really a great opportunity to just see baseball in its purest form, almost. I would say, I think, right? It's just so peaceful. It's the energy's high, the positivity's flowing. It's a great experience. So let's talk about our experience there, because we're going to get into major league rosters and everything next week. There's, the Sox are going to have to figure out their roster sooner than later. There's still a lot of roster spots seemingly up for grabs, even with a week and a half left of spring training at this point. Or just a week left of spring training. The team finishes spring training a week from today. So there's a lot to figure out still for this team. In terms of, what we were able to experience, let's start with the hitting side and then we'll move into pitching. A few guys that stood out for me on the big league side of things before we get into the minor league side. It's pretty clear to me that Brandon Drury is snagging a roster spot, I think. It's been pretty evident in terms of his performance, the way that we were talking about him, the way that people in the clubhouse were talking about him. It seems like of all the non-roster guys, there's a lot of hitters brought in to kind of compete for a spot. Seems like he has a clear leg up on all the other non-roster invites to camp as a guy who looks like he's going to make the roster at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. He's having a great spring. And conversely, the White Sox, I think yesterday, released Joey Gallo. So there goes
Yeah.
one of the NRI guys.
Yeah, exactly. So that was a clear. I think Gallo has not performed well in spring training. It doesn't seem like he's been effective. I don't know if you saw the report. He's switching to pitching. He's using his arm now. He's going to try to become a pitcher, taking in the Anthony Ghost route. I mean, there's been a handful of guys that have converted lately and have done a decent job with it. But we'll see there. Drury definitely seems like he's claiming a roster spot. The infield situation, right? We were there while Colson Montgomery was hurt. So we were kind of there during his week where he was dealing with injury. We kept hearing every day, like, when's he going to be back? When's he coming back to the field? Oh, he's taking BP today. We were supposed to see him in a B game and then he got scratched, right? It was kind of this continual, like, we'll see when he's back. He gets back in the lineup and then 2 days later is optioned to minor league camp. It was just kind of a matter of the time, I think. I think they did truly want to give him a chance to make the roster. But I think once we were there, and for me, once I was there and I saw him out for 4 days, then 5 days, then 6 days, it became clear that he just didn't have enough time and reps to claim the opening day shortstop spot. I think that's really what it came down to. I think if he had an entirely healthy spring and he was hitting well and all this stuff, like, yeah, he had a chance, but he had a chance with everything going well. With everything not going well, the chance became
Right.
pretty little, I think, right?
Yeah, there really wasn't any suspense there at the end of the day. He just didn't get enough at bats.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, but it's how it goes. The rest of the infield, we've mentioned before, Vaughn, Vargas, Rojas, kind of locks. It seems like Drury at this point is kind of locked in. Lenyn Sosa seems like a guy who is more than likely to make the roster. None of those guys are shortstops, Jeff. So this is the most interesting positional situation with the team right now. We got to know Chase Mydroth, which is really cool, really nice guy. Cool to get to talk to him, just hear about kind of his philosophy. He's one of those guys who he just embraces who he is as a player, and that's something that I really enjoy from guys, especially young guys, right? If you're able to know your strengths at that early of a stage in your career and play into them, I feel pretty good about your chances to be a big league piece, right? And that's with Mydroth, he told us, right, like my favorite quote from him was like, my job's to get on first base. Every time I come to the plate, my job's to get on base. There's other guys, there's times where I need to do more damage. There's times where I try to do more damage, but my job is to get on first base. And that's what Mydroth does. He hasn't had a great spring, but he's still getting on base at a decent clip. He's still taking good at bats. And he's getting played at shortstop a pretty good amount this spring. And he's getting played at the top of the lineup right now. What do you think with Colson not being there? Do you think Chase Mydroth is breaking camp with this team?
Well, I was going to ask you, do you think that he would jump the queue ahead of Brooks Baldwin?
Right now, I kind of do. That's what's interesting. I think Baldwin. So I also talked to Baldwin for a while. Good to kind of hear from him. He mentioned to me, and this was 2 weeks ago at this point almost, when I talked to him at the beginning of my time in Arizona. He said, hey, I'm focused on the three infield spots, but I'm still getting my reps in the outfield. He played center field the other day in a spring training game now. I think Baldwin's calling card is the versatility. I think with Baldwin, with all these injuries, right? Benintendi's out, not sure if he's going to be on the opening day roster. Austin Slater definitely seems like he's going to start on the IL this season, right? So you've got Luis Robert, Mike Tauchman, and Michael A. Taylor. Those are your three outfielders that are locked in. Beyond that, it's a total guessing game for the outfield. Brooks Baldwin, his versatility is what makes him appealing. In terms of starting games at shortstop, though, to me, spring training has indicated that Chase Mydroth might be ahead of Brooks Baldwin in that category.
Well, that's interesting. So you see a world where they both make the opening day squad.
I do, honestly. I think it's possible. I think they are a little bit redundant of a player. I think they bring similar things to the table, and that's why there's a chance they don't both make the roster. But I could see it being more of a, hey, we need multiple guys who can play shortstop, but Baldwin can also be our backup outfielder, right? Baldwin can be your utility backup outfielder who can play some backup outfield, who can back up Mydroth at shortstop, who can back up, Rojas at second base, right? Like that, I think, is where Baldwin shines. With that said, he hasn't gotten a ton of primary at-bats this spring in terms of the starting lineup, right? Like he hasn't been getting the at-bats that Mydroth has got and that some of these other guys have got. He also hasn't been that great in the at-bats he's gotten. I think with Baldwin, it's like he barely played in AAA last year. So I think there's not a downside really of him starting in AAA and just building up that acumen, getting a little bit more in the rhythm hitting wise. When he gets hot at the plate, yep, bring him up. He's ready, right? Like he can be useful at the big league level at any point. But I don't know if the team sees him as someone they want starting games, in which case you maybe would rather him be in AAA getting starts every day.
And keeping in mind that, again, we're talking about if the season unfolds like we expect it to, we're talking about a placeholder for Colson Montgomery for what, 4 to 6 weeks, 4 to 8 weeks.
Right. Like it's not, I think the intention is that you're holding a spot. That's exactly right. That's a good way to put it. If Colson Montgomery is healthy and plays, he doesn't even have to, in my opinion, he doesn't even have to like tear up the place in Charlotte, right? Like if he plays well in Charlotte and he's healthy, he will be the shortstop of this team come May, June at the latest, I would say, right? Like they
Right.
want him to be the shortstop. It's just not yet. So Mydroth and Baldwin, both of them are probably more of utility players moving forward. But right now, what does that mean? I mean, if you don't want either of them getting bumped in a month, is it Jacob Amaya for April? Like that's the other option, right? I think that's the option that I think a lot of people have started to consider is like, yeah, Jacob Amaya is not going to give you a lot of offense. I think that's pretty well established at this point through his big league career. But maybe he has a little more juice in the tank. And at the end of the day, he's going to give you solid defense at shortstop every day, day in and day out. So I could see it going a lot of different directions. I think Amaya's already on the 40 man, so is Baldwin. Mydroth isn't. But the 40 man has a lot of spots about to open up because Juan Carrell is about to go on the IL. Prelander Bro is about to go on the IL. There's going to be one or two other guys probably that end up on the IL as well. It seems like, so there's probably going to be a couple spots open. Yeah, you've got to get Drury onto the 40 man, right? That's one spot that probably gets taken. There's still going to be a spot or two open on the 40 man. So if they believe Mydroth is more capable of starting at shortstop right now and is a better option than Amaya or Baldwin, they'll find a way to get him on the 40 man. I just don't know if they want to burn that yet when you have Amaya and Baldwin who you can stopgap for a month until you deem Colson is ready.
No, it all makes sense, and I guess you're right. Jacob Amaya, but strange as it sounds, sort of becomes the wild card here. I mean, the White Sox seem to really like him, and so we're going to find out if they like him so much they're going to put him on the opening day roster, right?
Right. And then in terms of outfield, I know we mentioned this. Baldwin is an option there, but also, if Slater and or Benintendi are out, I think Slater will be. Benintendi's a little bit more of a toss-up. He still hasn't been back in games, though, so I do think he may open up on the 10-day IL. Then you've got Colas and Fletcher on the 40-man already. And then you've got a bunch of guys. They just brought in Travis Jankowski as a non-roster invite. You've got Cal Mitchell still there. You've got Corey Yolk still there. You've got Nick Maton. Anybody stand out to you from that group, or is it kind of just like a whoever is there can fill in for a few weeks until Benny's back, right?
We've seen a couple of those guys already not really do much in the majors. Nothing jumps out to me. I'm trying to think. Has any of those guys had a decent spring?
I think Maton's hit pretty well at times. Not really though. Overall, I think this is really just kind of a whoever gets another outfield. There's going to be at least one more outfielder on the roster, assuming Benny and Slater are out. So I think whoever gets that spot is just kind of a filler. Maybe they just want to stick somebody on the 40 man because it's easy. You don't have to add somebody to the 40 man if you just go with a Dominic Fletcher, Oscar Colas, right? Like you kind of know what those guys are at this point. I'm not sure there's much more there to. Oh, Fletcher. It looks like Fletcher was moved to minor league camp. Actually, I'm looking on the 40-man roster. It says he's in minors now. So I guess maybe Colas is the option. Whoever that outfielder is going to be more of a stopgap, to be honest. That's just how it's going to go. So we'll see what happens there. The minor league side, we got to talk to a lot of the new draft picks. I think that was one of the cooler things we did. Your last day there, I think we were around the backfields. There was a scrimmage going on. We were able to catch up with a good amount of the recent 2024 draft picks. What stood out to you? Because it's the first time for me. I had met Nick McClain before, but it's the first time I've met Casey Sauke, Caleb Bonnemer, a handful of these other guys that are high level draft picks that we're going to get to see for real in their first season this year.
Well, I think you and I were both pretty taken back. Caleb Bonner to be a 18-year-old high school
Yeah,
grad.
18, yeah.
Man, this guy
Yeah,
could step in
he's
at linebacker for a college already. This guy is big and solid. Now, Casey Salke is the same way, but he's what? He's like in his 20.
about to turn 22 soon, yeah.
But Bonner is a big man.
Yeah, Bonnemer was impressive. Bonnemer was dealing with a little bit of a hip soreness thing. He said he wasn't getting into scrimmages in the first week or two of camp, but by the time we were there, said he was already back in the cage. He was already taking my BP again. I know he's back into scrimmages now at this point, right? So a little bit of a slow start to camp, but Bonnemer, from a few of the live swings, I got to see him do some cage work a few days after the day after that, I think. This is a guy we're going to be watching very carefully. We've said this for a while. Like, you don't pay a guy significantly over slot in the second round out of high school if you're not, thinking it's a high upside piece, right? Like, for reference, right? Like George Walco got, I believe, a little bit of over $1 million in his signing bonus. It was $1 million exactly. Caleb Bonnemer got a $3 million signing slot out of high school, right? So I know Walcow skipped a year of high school, right? Like there's a difference there, of course. Bonnemer was second rounder. Walcow was a later round pick. Right? They slotted up, yeah, but like this is a guy that's going to have the potential to be a clear top prospect in the system in a year or two from now. He's already kind of in that borderline top 10. I think he was FutureSox's 11th ranked prospect, if I'm remembering right. Bonnemer is going to be really fun to watch. I do think he'll open up in the complex league just because he doesn't have any games under his belt yet. I still think he started the spring a little slow with the hip thing. I think Bonnemer will be in the complex and will very quickly push his way to Kannapolis, just like George Walcow did last year. Bonnemer is the guy that, from us talking to him, getting to know him a little bit, like this is a guy we're going to be keeping a very close eye on this season because he is a strong dude at 19 years old with a lot of upside. The swing is powerful. It's compact. It's clean looking. I'm hyped to see his first full season, and I'm excited for him to get to Kannapolis so you can see him in person a handful of times.
Yeah, I'm equally pumped about that. Let's see. Who else? Well,
Selke too was very impressive. Selke and McLean, right? These are the third and fourth rounders from last year. These are two guys that are super exciting, pieces. Selke started in Winston last year because he was fully healthy. McLean was still kind of getting situated with the organization. He was coming off an injury in his collegiate season, so he didn't play any games last year. Selke will definitely open again in Winston. I think he's your opening day left fielder, right fielder. I'm not sure exactly which one, but he's going to open in the outfield in Winston. You're going to get an outfield in Winston most likely with Casey Selke and Braden Montgomery, which is going to be real exciting. Braden Montgomery, watched him take BP, also very exciting, very impressive rounds of BP for him. He's still got a long way to go, of course, but those two in the outfield in Winston is going to be rather fun. McLean, I think, will probably open up in Kannapolis just because he didn't play at all last year. There's a chance he opens in Winston. Honestly, I think, an outfield of McLean, Selke, and Montgomery would be incredible to watch in Winston. That would be pretty fun for sure. But even if McLean opens up in Canny, I think he'll be in Winston sooner than later as a guy with a lot of college experience, right?
yeah, I think I may be getting an apartment for the summer in Winston-Salem. It sounds like that's going to be the team to
It's
watch
gonna
this.
get fun. It's gonna get fun real quick. I think last year we were really excited about a lot of things going on in Kannapolis, and this year a lot of those guys are moving on up. I think Pat Leland, the coach moves up from Candy to Winston. The guy Pat has been amazing to both of us always. Super insightful. Guys love playing for him. He's gonna get a lot of those guys he had in Candy now moving up to Winston. Another guy from last year's draft class that we've talked to before, we've mentioned him many times this offseason, Sam Antonacci. Um,
Yeah.
I don't know what else I can really say about Sam Antonacci. If you don't know the name yet, like, get with the name. This is a guy who, it's just so simple for Sam Antonacci. Like, it's not a complicated approach. It's a simple swing. It's mechanically sound. He just gets the bat on the ball. Like, I know that's like so basic to say, and there's not a lot of analysis behind that. He is one of the best pure hitters in this entire farm system. I don't think that's a crazy thing to say. It might be a little out there, but like, in the B game, we saw him hit an opposite field homer on a first pitch fastball because he saw a first pitch fastball. He chased it. He's usually a really patient guy, too. That's what was cool to see from him. This is a guy who usually is working at bats, trying to find the right pitches to hit. He takes a lot of walks. He makes a lot of good contact. First pitch fastball hunts against, a AAA level pitcher, immediately takes it over the left center fence on an opposite field homer. That was the second at bat I saw of him at spring training. Antonacci's another guy from that draft class. All of those top 5 round guys are going to be really fun to watch from this last draft class this year.
Yeah, I only saw two B games while I was there, but
Yeah.
Antonacci does what he does, which is in that one game he had the home run. In the other game, he had a key sack fly. I mean, he gets his bat on the ball. Small sample, but that's all he did last year, the last month of the season in Kannapolis. And so, yeah, that's definitely another guy we're hoping to see. Do you think he opens in Winston?
There's no reason for him not to. Honestly, he only played 27 games or whatever in Canny last year, but like, there's nothing Sam Antonacci needs to prove in Kannapolis still. I
Right.
think he's already advanced of a hitter enough where he should be in Winston immediately. I think you're going to get Selke. I think you're going to get Antonacci. I think soon enough McLean, Braden Montgomery. I think that Winston lineup is going to be fun. We just said it, but that's going to be a fun lineup. I think the pitching is more stacked heavily in Birmingham and beyond, right? But I think that Winston lineup is going to be extremely fun to watch, and I think Antonacci is going to be a part of that. Another guy that could get to Winston. We saw George Walkow. We mentioned him earlier. Hit a double in the B game off Fraser Ellard, lefty on lefty too. I think that was really good to see George be able to kind of get that lefty swing off. Right, still going to be a guy that whiffs a lot. Right, I saw him take some live BP. There was a lot of swing and miss for sure. It's still coming along for him. It's going to take time, definitely. It seems like he's already been kind of like a buzz name for a year now plus, right? Like, since he's been drafted, but especially since last year, like, a lot of people know George Walkow at this point. He's pretty well established within the White Sox community. He's still 19, Jeff. He's still 19, and every time I see him, I feel like he grows and looks even bigger and stronger and more capable. It's going to take some time, but I think Walkow, with a strong first half in Candy, could end up finishing the year in Winston.
Did you talk to George in spring training? I did not,
Just
and
a little bit,
I'm
just a
just
brief
curious.
catch up. Yeah.
I'm just curious what he did over the winter. If anything's different about his
He
swing.
was he was working out in Chicago. I think he was doing his thing. He's back in his hometown. I think he was just grinding, getting stronger, continuing. He said he's continuing to just track and work on his breaking ball approach because that's something for him. Like, I think that's always been the biggest thing for him is figuring out how to hit breaking balls. And like, you got to remember, like, 3 years of high school, skipped a year of high school. You're already not going to see great breaking balls in suburban Illinois, suburban Chicago high school baseball. Like, you're not seeing more than one or two pitchers in a season that actually have high level breaking balls. balls, right? Like he played in the same conference as Ryan Sloan. I don't know if you know Ryan Sloan from the
Mhm.
Mariners draft pick. He played at
Yeah,
York. So they're in the same conference. He used to face Ryan. Other than Ryan Sloan, though, there's probably not a single pitcher that George faced in high school that was even close to the breaking balls that he's seeing now in the minor league level, right? So I think that it's going to take time, but he seems confident. He's always a guy who's continuing to work. The work ethic is off the charts. I'm excited to see it, and seeing him hit well a few times on lefty was a big step in my opinion.
right. And as you and I have talked about before, a lot of this comes down to, can he go to Winston and get regular at bats, or does he need to stay in Kannapolis till
Right.
he,
And
because
that's why it starts in Canny, probably because we just mentioned Brady Montgomery, Casey Sauke, Nick McLean. Like there's a lot of guys who are going to need those at bats in Winston. But
right.
I think with a strong, 3 months in Canny, we could see George at least get a taste of high A to finish out the season and then go into next year at only 20 years old, being like a fully high A ready player, potentially gets double A that season. I mean, the ceiling is off the charts, like we've said before. There's a lot of steps to go, but I'm excited to keep seeing him develop.
I
Um,
could I could see it mid-year, George
yeah.
going to Winston and Salke going to Birmingham. Or
Definitely possible with
yeah,
Sauke's experience and Brady Montgomery too. I think. I mean,
right,
any of those
right,
guys who have a lot of college experience, right? Like we could see them take a next step once they're healthy, once they get rolling. Like there's going to be those outfielders. It's still a weaker positional group in terms of depth, but I think one of the big things my takeaway from spring training was like there's some pretty good outfielders in the system compared to like what we may have talked about a year ago. I think Brady
right.
Montgomery obviously is the headliner, but when you've got Walkout and then you add McLean and Sauke in the beginning of the draft last year, like it's coming along. It's a position that has needed to be addressed for a while, but it's slowly but surely they're filling out the minor league depth in terms of outfielders.
Yeah, I think it's the upper levels of the minors where there's maybe a
Right.
dearth of high ceiling guys, and maybe that's
Right.
what had us thinking there wasn't a lot of depth. You're
For
right.
sure.
Lower levels, really exciting. And one quick thing before we move on, that you and I both comment on, is that we had both heard the reputation that Braden Montgomery was a big power hitter, and I think we were a little surprised to see that. He didn't have the physique that you would expect of a big power hitter like Casey Salke, for example.
Sure.
He's
He's
pretty slender.
yeah. Yeah, no, he's not a huge dude, but Montgomery's bat speed is off the charts. I mean, that's what it is with him, right? It's not like you're not looking at a towering presence. I think that's completely true. It's just he is just seriously like quick and twitchy in a way that very few hitters are. You see him move and his swing and his style, and the bat is flying through the zone. The barrel is not. I mean, it's there, right? Like I think Montgomery. It's just a freaky level of athleticism and talent for a guy that's not huge, but still has 30 homer plus upside, right? Which is super exciting. So looking forward to seeing how he goes. One more hitter I want to mention, who this was our first time seeing him in person. First time ever seeing Javier Mogollon in
Yeah,
person.
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
all he does is his first at bat watching him. I walked up. I knew Javier Mogollon was a small guy. He is listed. Let me see what he's listed at. He's listed at 5'8". I think that's probably generous. I think Javier Mogollon is probably like 5'6". And his first at bat that we saw from him works a full count. He takes two really close pitches from Eric Adler. This is a guy who, his numbers are appealing, right? He had really interesting home run, stolen base numbers in the complex last year, but the strikeouts were off the chart. He was striking out at a 35-40% clip,
Yeah.
works a really good count, takes two hard pitches, and then turns on a 3-2 pitch, gone homer to left center. It's
Smoke.
hard to make a better first impression for me than a guy that I've never seen in person who's facing a double A experienced relief pitcher as an 18-year-old guy and takes a full count home run to left center. Impressive. Again, it's one swing. I'm not going to put too much stock in one at bat that I saw,
Right.
but for someone who I've never seen in person, it was instantly impressive to see Mogollon have a full count home run his first at bat we saw.
Yeah, that was fun. And this is a good time to plug your ex Twitter
Yeah.
account, because you got a brief but good video of Mogollon turning on that pitch and jacking it out of the
Yeah.
park. So
Yeah, I stopped my video. I usually I'm in the routine when I'm taking videos over and over. I stop it when I see contact if I don't think the contact's a home run or anything. And it was a home run. It really didn't even look like it off the bat. At initial contact, I was just in my routine where I just click and click and click, and that's on me for sure. But it's I still got the swing in there, luckily, and the swing's pretty. It's
yeah,
compact. It's a little bit of a long swing still. Like there's still stuff to work on there, but Mogi Owen hopefully will make his way to Kannapolis this season and will be another guy that we're at least interested in seeing how that talent develops for a really unique profile as a small guy who is able to tap into a lot of power while also being a very fast base runner and impact guy in that way too. So another guy to keep an eye on there. Anybody else on the hitting side you want to mention before we dive into some pitchers? Because the pitching
um,
was fun.
two catchers. One is Jackson Appel. We chatted. He didn't do anything
Caught
else
up with him too. Yeah.
we happened to see, but I'm hoping that he opens the season on that what's sounding like a really stacked Winston team. Um,
Yep.
and then I bumped into Ronnie Hernandez, and we were practice. I was practicing Spanish. He was practicing English, so we had a nice chat and a fun chat. And I asked him what he did in the off season, and he said the White Sox asked him to get in better shape. He was a little flabby last year. That's not the case this year. He looks in much better shape. So anxious to see what year number two brings for him in pro ball.
Yeah. I think that's gonna be fun. I think Ronnie is a guy that I think he should be, in Canny, I think, just because he needs a little more time to develop still there. And I think when you have so many other catchers like Appel, like Calvin Harris, that are kind of ahead of him still in the pecking order, I think you can send Appel straight to Winston. I think he has, 4 or 5 years of college experience. It's, I think there's just so much to like from that catching core. I think there's a lot of depth, which is something we haven't seen in a long time. So excited to see how the catchers continue to develop beyond, Kyle Teal and Edgar Caro, right?
Right, right. And one last guy to talk about before we move on to pitching, and that's you and I happened to be catching batting practice one day, and we saw Elko smoke a ball opposite field on a line drive, and the guy's, still has the big strikeout rates, but he still has the big power.
Yeah, for sure. The power is there. I think Elko will debut at some point later this season. It's just hard to find at bats for a guy that's limited a little bit positionally. Some quick breaking news, Jeff. As we're recording here, this is funny timing. The White Sox just made 11 minor league or 11 cuts from the roster spring training camp. Edgar Caro and Kyle Teal will both officially open the season in Charlotte. Makes sense. I think we expected that to be the case. So it's going to be Corey Lee and Matt Theis then that start as the catchers. Mason Adams, Peyton Pallette, a handful of other pitchers as well, also assigned to minor league camp. Dominic Fletcher, like I mentioned earlier, going to Charlotte, in addition to Cal Mitchell, Zach DeLoach, and Corey Yolks all being down to minor league camp as well. So in terms of outfield mix, that leaves a couple names left. That definitely limits Fletcher going down, Yolks going down, DeLoach going down. That definitely means I think that would put Oscar Colas at the forefront of most likely to make the roster in terms of the outfield backup. Sure. Yeah,
Either
right.
either he or Jankowski, right?
Right. I think Jankowski is the other one who definitely could be. I think honestly,
Yeah.
Jankowski's experience could make him the favorite there. Actually, Nick Maton's still in the big league camp too, so that
All right.
could be a name to watch. I kind of expected him to be in the same group as a Cal Mitchell and a Corey Yulk, so he clearly has a slight step above those guys. But yeah, Caro and Teal is the real news there. We expected it. Do I love it? No. I part of me wants to just see either of those guys just make the roster because I think they're both going to be there soon. But at the same time, get them in Charlotte together. They're going to work together, figure out how to split the time at catcher in Charlotte, and soon enough they will be catching in Chicago. I have no doubt that this season, those will be the primary catchers in Chicago sooner than later. It's just not immediately. This offense is going to be a little hard to watch at times. So the first month or two of the season, I'll put it that way. But there will be stuff to like soon for sure.
I'll tell you an offense that's going to be fun to watch, and that's going to be the
Charlotte.
Charlotte infield of
Whew, yeah.
Brian Ramos, Colson, either Baldwin or Montgomery, Tim Elko,
Yeah.
Teal, and Caro. That's the
100%.
infield.
To
Yeah.
be honest, we didn't mention it earlier, but I should have mentioned Brian Ramos in the infield mix because there's a chance he still makes this roster. After debuting last year, he's already on the 40-man. Yeah, the positional stuff's a little tough, but if you can make Ramos a rotating backup at third, second, and DH kind of, I could see Ramos still breaking this team. There's definitely a chance. He's not in this group right now. He's not going down with Caro and Teal, so clearly they want another week of looking at him in big league spring training. So I could see Ramos still cracking the roster, even though it is unlikely.
Yeah, and he's another guy like Colson that missed a lot of opportunities for at bats because he was recovering from, I guess, a hand injury, I believe. So, yeah, that'd be exciting to see. You know, we're all for seeing these young guys get to Chicago as soon as possible. And I have one question for you before we move on to pitching. Did you get a chance to see William Bergola at all, or do you
I
have an?
didn't see Bergoya at all. I didn't see Bergoya at all personally. Like I saw a few of his backfield reps. I think in the B games. I think he took a few bats in the B games. Nothing crazy there, but he's been impressive in spring training. I think he's turned a lot of heads. Honestly, some games he was really big, and he's come in as a minor league backup for a handful of spring training games and done some good work and had some really good at bats. Bergoya is still another guy who's a little bit limited in terms of his upside. He's a small guy, not a lot of power in the tank. But in terms of a middle infielder who gets good bats at the ball, makes good contact, he's already at the Winston level, right? Like I think he's a guy who will get significant at bats this year, and he's kind of in that similar tier with Raul Perez, I think, where like those are the your moderate upside middle infielders where they're young, they're exciting, they've got some things to look for. So Bergoya is a guy that I think is definitely someone I need to take a closer look at this season because I do think that he's done some good things this spring and made some people aware of him for sure.
I really enjoyed watching him in Winston last year. I thought had a really solid year.
Yeah.
I was curious if you had formed an opinion of him because he's getting seems to be getting a lot of run in spring training.
For sure. I think that the organization seems to like him. I think they seem to like his upside and I think again, it's not a super projectable profile, but I think it's a high floor quality middle infielder who is at least is going to be someone to keep an eye on throughout the season. Yeah.
Right, right. Okay.
Moving on to pitchers. There's so much to talk about here. We could talk. I mean, I will probably have more thoughts on pitching in the next week or two because there's just a lot to talk about and a lot to like here. You got to start with the big three, right? I think the big three names of camp are Noah Schultz, Hagen Smith, and Grant Taylor. In terms of starters, actually, I should go back, right? In terms of major league stuff, we finally know the rotation, right? Yeah, actually, I'm going to pause myself. Before we get into those three big prospects, let's talk about the big league rotation just a little bit. Sean Burke named the opening day starter yesterday. I don't know if you saw that. Super
Yeah,
happy for Sean Burke.
fantastic. Yeah,
Total surprise. Did not expect that at all. Definitely thought it was going the direction of a Davis Martin or even a Martin Perez if they wanted to go the veteran route, right? But
right.
Sean Burke, I think it was sort of a scheduling thing. I think part of it is just kind of how the schedule will end up with him being set in terms of the days ahead of spring training to be the guy that throws that day. But I also think it shows a level of embracing the youth. It shows a level of like, you know what? This guy's only thrown 4 big league games, but his stuff is nasty. We want him to be a part of this team for in the future. We're going to let him start opening day, and we're going to let you see kind of what the future looks like for him and for this team going forward. I love it. I'm all here for it personally.
Yeah, yeah, great guy. Has looked great. Once he finally got healthy, he's really turned into the prospect that everyone thought he was for the longest time.
Yeah.
Yeah,
100%. It's, I think he is going to be a really fun guy to watch this year. I think of all the 4 guys that are locked in the rotation, I think he's probably the highest upside piece there. I think that it's hard to argue against, out of Martin, Cannon, and Perez, we're already locked in the rotation. But I think Burke is the guy of those 4 that has the upside to be, the highest end pitcher. Yeah, there's a range of outcomes. His command is still iffy at times. But Burke's stuff is great. It's continued to look good this spring. I'm just excited to see him and the rest of the rotation. Davis Martin looked incredible the 2 times I saw him through in Arizona. He threw in a B game the day before I left. He looked really, really good. The
yeah,
kick change exceptional. He added a sinker to his arsenal to kind of mix off that kick change. Super fun pitcher there. Cannon has had a rough spring, but I'm not too worried about it. He's been playing around with the arsenal a lot. He's been trying to figure out how to mix and match, how to sequence things. I still think Cannon's going to be a consistent back of the rotation guy. That's always what he's been. That's what he was last year. I think he'll be that again. Martin Perez, veteran edition. It was cool getting to talk to him a little bit after the game. The one day he threw when I was in Arizona. Just a really mature guy. I think he's very much embracing and okay with his role on this team. Like he's super, I'm not going to tell you what to do. I'm not here to coach these young guys, but I'm here for them. If they have ideas, if they want to talk through things, I'm here to talk to guys, and I'm here to just be a veteran who leads by what I do and leads by the work I put in. And that's
Mhm.
very clear that he's accepting that role and embracing it. 5 starter, Jeff. It's got to be Shane Smith,
Yeah,
right? It's got to
yeah,
be.
yeah.
So Shane Smith, like I didn't know a lot about Shane Smith. I'm not going to act like I was an expert on Shane Smith before the White Sox drafted him, first overall pick in the Rule 5 draft. So for those listening that don't know exactly what that means, the Rule 5 draft is basically where teams get the opportunity to draft players that are not on another team's 40-man. So the Brewers chose not to put Shane Smith on their 40-man, which allowed the White Sox to take him with the first pick in the Rule 5 draft. I mean, he has looked unbelievable this spring. We will see how that translates. I still think his stuff in terms of 99 miles an hour rate, like, I don't know how that looks as a full time starter. I think I kind of assumed he was going to be a reliever heading into the spring, but he's making starts, and every single start he makes has been real impressive.
Yeah, I just came across him last year because of fantasy baseball. He was just tearing it up in Double A, so I took a flyer on him then, and just he's continued to do what he did last year. So yeah, it's real exciting, uh, and possibly big upside. We'll find out. Yeah.
No, 100%. I think there's a lot to like there. Bryce Wilson is the other guy who's kind of still in the mix for that five starter spot. Another guy from Milwaukee signed on a 1 year deal. He was a swingman last year. Bryce Wilson is probably the more like, safe plug option, right? He's kind of just your swingman. The thing that I was thinking is like, oh, Drew Thorpe probably has a rotation spot when he gets back. Drew Thorpe is going to get a rotation spot when he's fully ramped up come May or so, right? But like initially it was like, oh, whoever gets that spot between Smith and Bryce Wilson, they immediately get replaced by Drew Thorpe. If Shane Smith has an incredible month at 24 years old, does he get replaced by Drew Thorpe, or is someone else's spot going to get taken?
Well, I think the likelihood is there'll be more of a need for a replacement starter because of injury than him
Sure.
bumping someone in the rotation, unless there's somebody,
That's a good point.
unless Cannon. Well, even if Cannon continues to struggle, he's going to have a long leash. So, yeah.
Right. So
So,
it's interesting. I don't know what that looks like, right?
right, who do you see in the bullpen? Give me 6, 7 guys you think who are locked.
Yeah, so I wrote a whole piece, people. Yeah, you can check this out on justbaseball.com. I did a whole piece on the bullpen because one of the last days I was there, Will Venable kind of said publicly and to the media, right? I'd asked him a question about like Mike Clevenger coming back. What does your closer role look like? He does not plan to name a closer. He made it very clear that he's not going to name a sole closer for the season heading into the year. He wants it to flow. There's a lot of open-ended stuff with the bullpen. I think it's very clear from Venable's stance that the bullpen is going to be a work in progress all year. It's going to be a continual kind of, we'll see what happens. You can get a heavy high leverage. You can get a high leverage. Like, it's going to be a figuring it out process. There's going to be a committee closing games. It's really going to just be a hot hand. That's my opinion. That's my gauge on the bullpen is it's going to be who's pitching well. You're going to get some high leverage spots. You're pitching not as well right now. You're going to go pitch in the 6th inning today. Like, it's going to be moving all the time. What I have right now, and my sense from talking to guys from the sense of the roster, the guys that I think have kind of locked up bullpen spots is whoever loses that 5 starter spot between Smith and Wilson, right? So if it's Bryce Wilson, if it's Shane Smith in the 5, the other one will be kind of the long reliever in the bullpen. That's the first spot. Cam Boozer locked in. He was traded for this offseason. Gus Varland had a strong year last year for the White Sox after coming over. He's pretty locked in. Penn Murphy has been exceptional this offseason, has a big league track record for 2 seasons of being a good big league pitcher before his injury. Penn Murphy, I would say, is pretty locked in. Justin Anderson, the White Sox had him up last year. He wasn't great, to be honest, but he churned innings. They gave him money in arbitration. So when you give a guy money in arbitration, more likely than not, they're going to be on the big league roster. So those are 5 names. I think Tyler Gilbert, who was traded for from the Phillies this offseason, if you're trading for a guy with big league experience and you're trading away a recent draft pick in Aaron Combs, probably going to make the roster. That's 6. And then from there, the others, Steven Wilson, Fraser Ellard, Jordan Leisure. I think those are probably the 3 that I would be looking at for the final 2 spots. I'm not sure which one of those would make it over the other ones. Ellard and Leisure have both had their ups and downs this spring, but they're a little bit more upside, a little bit younger, more to dream on there. Steven Wilson, we saw last year. He got pulled off the 40-man. He's been on and off. He's kind of the veteran option there. I think those are the 9 names that will be in play right now, but there's also a few non-roster guys that are still in play. I could see a lot of directions, but those are kind of the 9 that I have pegged as the likely bullpen guys to start the season, I think.
All right. So as you go through the list of starters and relievers, I'm starting to get a clearer picture of who we can probably expect to see in Charlotte. Starting with Thorpe on rehab and Nastrini, Iriarte. They're going to continue to give him opportunities to start, and Owen White. So there are 4 starters. Who am I missing as a
Yeah.
potential starter in Charlotte?
Schuster is another one.
Yeah.
I think, yeah, there's a handful of guys. Unfortunately, Mason Adams, the flexor strain, huge bummer. I was so excited to see Adams this year. Gets pulled out of the game a few days ago. Not Tommy John right now, which is great. That's great news. I was definitely fearing that he was going to be the fifth White Sox pitcher to get TJ this spring. Not that for Mason. It sounds like it's a flexor strain. He's going to be shut down for a month plus, and then they're going to reevaluate from there. Definitely a bummer, though. I was expecting Mason Adams to debut come May or June, and now at this point, it looks like if he does debut this season, it would be later in the year, second half of the year at the earliest. There's also a chance he doesn't debut at all this season if the injury prolongs and gets worse, because flexor strains can be really tricky for pitchers, unfortunately. So we'll see what happens there. Definitely a bummer, though, because you've got a lot of this depth that we've talked about, right, is kind of out the window now. Bush gets TJ, Juan Corella gets TJ, Mason Adams is now going to be shut down for a good amount at the start of the season. A lot of these young arms that we were excited to see kind of potentially debut this year or continue to have success at the next level are now not available. So it really comes down to Nick Nastrini and Jairo Uriarte. Those are going to be your two depth guys. I think that if a pitcher were to get hurt, those are the two guys you're looking at then of, are they ready to take a big league spot? And are they capable of that? They both debuted last year. They both have some stuff to figure out with their command, especially. But I think those are the two guys that have become now the forefront of the depth in Charlotte there.
Yeah. And, it almost goes without saying, but that's why every year you just have wave after wave after wave of pitchers moving through your
Yep.
system because you're going to burn through them.
Yeah, and we've talked about there's a lot of depth of pitchers, and it's hard to figure out the rotations, but you need the depth of pitching. You
Yeah.
really do. As much as it's frustrating, you really truly need that depth of pitching. And the White Sox, they needed it for sure. They've needed it for a while. They need it now still, and it's unfortunate that all these guys have gone down with injuries, but it's necessary. That's why you need pitchers. That's why you need arms around. So. Unfortunately, there's going to be even these guys we mentioned that aren't necessarily going to make the roster out of camp are going to get innings this year. You're going to need arms in your system that are going to get innings and churn innings for you throughout the season. So even a guy like Trey Mago, right, who went down to minor league camp, right, like Trey Mago will get bullpen innings this year and deserves to get bullpen innings this year. You need guys that are good quality arms in Charlotte who you can call on this season to take innings when needed, right?
Easily, I'm going to say easily off the top of my head, there are going to be 10 relievers in Charlotte who will pitch in Chicago this year.
Probably. Yeah, that's about right. That's how it goes. That's baseball. And that's why, this pitching depth is an important thing for the White Sox to have in the system right now compared to where it used to be. That's for sure. So, yeah, we will see where all that goes. Getting down to the prospects, though, I mean, the pitching at the major league level, I do think is going to be better than people say it will. I think based on the numbers, based on the projections, right, I think this pitching staff will overperform people's expectations. The talk of camp is still the big three prospects, Jeff. I mean, we were there. We saw it firsthand. We saw all three of these guys throw in person. Noah Schultz, Hagen Smith both got 2 games each, piggybacking, back-to-back outings, right, with each other. They pitched 2 different spring training games. They both did it in the same games. Grant Taylor, I believe, got 4 outings in spring training, I want to say, either 3 or 4 outings in spring training that he was able to throw. These three are just so impressive. They're just so impressive. And it's really easy to focus on Noah Schultz and Hagen Smith, right? Like those are the 2 guys everybody's focusing on. But
Right.
Grant Taylor has very, very quickly made his name known this spring. We already were talking about him last year. We've been talking about Grant Taylor, but this is a guy that, I don't know if you saw the Just Baseball Top 100. Shout out Aram, who works incredibly hard on the JB Top 100. But Grant Taylor debuted at 83rd in baseball on the Top 100 this week. This is a guy who could easily be a top 50 prospect in all of Major League Baseball and a consensus one if he's healthy this season and does what we know he's capable of doing.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, it's exciting to know all 3 of those guys are getting close. It's now it's not a pipe dream. These guys are Birmingham and could easily skip Charlotte. So they're getting close to the big leagues. It's funny. I'm not sure I ever saw Hagen Smith apart from Noah Schultz. The first day I got there, the 2 of them were
Nope.
doing some tossing on the field. I mean, these guys were joined at the hip all spring training. They appeared in
Yeah, so
every game. It's kind of cute.
that's a great takeaway. They were locker mates, right? So I talked to both of them in the locker room. They have lockers next to each other. They throw together every day. That to me indicates they're both going to be in Birmingham. I think there was a chance that Hagen Smith would have started in Winston just because he didn't pitch much last year in terms of the minor leagues. These 2 are going to be in Birmingham together. They're going to be the 1-2 punch in Birmingham. And that Birmingham rotation, we saw a report today that there's a chance Grant Taylor opens up in Birmingham too. So I think Taylor still has a shot to start in Winston just because he's further behind those 2 in terms of his innings build up, right? Like Taylor has a long, limited amount of innings to build up. I could see anything happening. But in general, like whenever Taylor does get to Birmingham, that trio is the best rotation trio in minor league baseball. I don't think there's any ifs, ands, and buts about it. You are not going to find a more talented top three in a rotation in all of minor league baseball, and that alone is going to make Birmingham must-watch baseball for me this season.
And in addition to those three, you're going to add Aldrin Batista, Riley
Yep.
Gowan, Tyler Schweitzer, I'm guessing. And last year, that we pretty much felt like Birmingham had the best rotation in Double A, and they
Yep.
did so well. They made the playoffs. This rotation is going to be much better.
It should be. It should be even better. That's crazy to think about. Last year you had Thorpe, you had Schultz, you had Mason Adams, you had Nick Nastrini. Like this could be even better. It's
Right.
insane how good these pitchers are. I mean, it's just yeah, it's really impressive. Everything that we saw from those three was just off the charts. Taylor pumping 102 in a February spring training or 101 in a February spring training game is ridiculous. Schultz and Smith both just even with their both of them, like the one start we saw in person, like or the game we saw where each of them threw 2 innings when we were there, neither of them had their best stuff. They both admitted it. Neither of them had their best command, and they both still worked 2 scoreless innings each. Like they are the type of pitchers where on a bad day you're going to get some pretty good innings from them probably. Like that's how good they are and how good they're going to be at the Double A level. It's exciting. I wrote I wrote full pieces with some quotes from those guys that you can check out on from my stuff. In terms of my reporting when I was at spring training, but like the three of them are exceptional, and they like one thing I said in one of my articles is like if the White Sox are going to be a contender come 2027 2028, like in the second half of this decade, if the White Sox are going to legitimately contend in Major League Baseball, it's probably going to be largely and partly at least because of those three. Like that's what it comes down to. I think if this team is going to be a contender, it's going to be because at least one or two of those three, if not all three, have become elite pitchers at the highest level, right?
Well, it's interesting you say that because I have been thinking about the flip side. If for whatever reason these three guys don't pan out, the White Sox are going to be perennial bottom feeders for another couple of years.
Ooh, we don't need to think about that,
I
Jeff.
mean,
But
I
you're
know,
not
I
wrong.
know,
You're not
but
wrong.
I'm just
Yeah,
saying, as much depth as the minor league system has, and they've got so much depth that if you look on Fangraphs, they have 7 guys now with a 50 grade or higher score.
future value. Yeah,
And,
yeah.
and you're gonna, but for this team to get to where it wants to go, you need 4 or 5 of those guys to really reach their ceiling.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean,
I think you're right. I
not
think you're
rocket
right.
science, but you know,
Yeah, no, I hear you though. I think that's fair for sure. That's definitely a fair point. But I do think the upside is sky high.
yeah,
Keep these
yeah,
guys healthy. Limit their innings as you need to. Right. Like I think for Schultz and Smith, the goal is to get 5 innings to start. Right. I think you got 100-ish innings out of both of them last year. A little under 100 innings out of both of them last year. For Hagen between college and a little bit of time in Winston. For Schultz, it was just mostly Winston and Birmingham. The goal is to get them over 100 innings, right? You want to get those guys 110 to 120 innings is what it sounds like the goal is. Have
yeah.
them pitching every week, have them pitching 5 innings per start at least. Like if you can do that this year, you're setting those guys up for hopefully a debut at the end of the season, and if not, to be the key focal point of this pitching staff come 2026 and beyond, right? Like that is the goal. Grant
Yeah.
Taylor, it's a little bit behind that. I think Grant Taylor, the goal this year is just keep him healthy, 4 innings to start probably similar to how Schultz was handled last year for Taylor, right? Like build up those innings, get him working. He's probably more of your 2027 long-term target, right? Like, yeah, he might debut in 26, but I think Taylor, the goal is to be a 2027 impact player versus Smith and Schultz, where like you want them up in 26. I think the goal is to have them up in 2026 for sure. It's exciting. Beyond those three, some interesting guys for sure. Who are some of the
Before
other pitchers? Yeah, go
before
ahead.
we move on to those three, I know you get into the intricacies of pitching in a level that most of us don't. Are those 3 guys working on any new pitches, making any tweaks? What are they working on? What did you see them working on or in trying to do in spring training of note?
Yeah, so I think with Grant Taylor, that was the most, interesting one that I talked to about kind of what he was working on. Taylor talked about how he's always been this fastball slider guy, right? Like and a curveball, right? Fastball breaking ball has kind of always been his bread and butter, right? Like he's one of those guys who just is going to be able to dominate when you have a fastball that's that hard. It works that well, right? Like there's so much to like there that it's hard to kind of you don't need to do as much, and he didn't need to do as much in college. But he added a changeup this offseason. That's one thing he talked to me about. He's already got this so he's got a fastball, right? He's got a really sharp cutter, and he's got a really deep slider in addition to the curveball, right? So he's already got those four pitches. He's adding a changeup because he doesn't really have pitches that go arm side, right? Taylor's a guy who has his high riding fastball. It's got a lot of movement on it, kind of towing up in the zone, right? He's got both the cutter, which is just kind of straight and down, and then he's got the slider, which has more of that sweep, and then he has the curveball that's a really aggressive downer curveball. The changeup for him, if he can add a pitch, especially against lefties, is what he talked about, that can differentiate and go the opposite direction, then you're looking at an arsenal that is a true starter's arsenal without any holes in it. The changeup is becoming such a wave in this organization, and that's something that I have a busy week this week, but at some point I'm going to write a whole piece on this kick change thing. The kick change is rampant. Davis Martin started it. Brian Bannister taught Davis Martin this kick changeup, because he couldn't quite find a feel for his changeup ever. Davis Martin's a guy that throughout his whole minor league career, he never really had a feel for a changeup. He starts throwing this kick changeup, and his entire arsenal changed. I talked to Matt Zaleski, who's a pitching coordinator for the White Sox organization also, who talked to me about kind of the development of this kick changeup. There's like 10 guys in the organization now that are all learning and throwing this kick changeup. Gus Varland talked to me about it. Eric Adler talked to me about it. I mean, it goes down the levels too. Like, it's not just at the big league level. This kick changeup is going rampant. Taylor's doesn't sound like it's exactly a kick changeup. It sounds like it's more of a traditional circle changeup. But Taylor adding a changeup to his mix, if it's even a decent changeup, it's a whole added layer to a guy that already has two elite breaking balls, an elite fastball, and a cutter. Super exciting for Taylor. Schultz, Noah Schultz is throwing this cutter more. That's super fun to see. He already kind of threw it a little last year, but he talked to me about how he didn't really have a need for it last year. It wasn't a pitch that he ever felt like he needed to throw. The cutter for him is the bridging the gap, right? He has this huge sweepy slider, this really, really beautiful moving slider. It's maybe the best slider in minor league baseball, probably is the best slider in minor league baseball. The cutter bridges that gap for him. It's in between the slider and the fastball in terms of velocity. It's more around that 90-91 range. It still has some vertical movement like the fastball, but it also has some depth to it in a way that his fastball is a natural sinker, right? He still throws the four seam, but he throws a sinker a lot more often. So the cutter kind of plays in between in a different way than that sinker and that slider. Super excited to see what that looks like. Hagen Smith, I'm trying to remember if Hagen Smith is throwing anything new. I don't think he kind of added anything. I think Hagen might have talked about adding a little bit of stuff. I want to say he's messing around with some things, but I don't think he added super anything. I know he talked about the curveball that he's been working on. I think it's something he already threw in the past. Oh yeah, here he is. I'm pulling up my notes here. He has added more of a curveball. He said he's worked on refining his curveball. He already had the splitter in the bag. Another guy who's only had to throw a fastball and a slider for most of his career because it's that good. In college, you can get away with a fastball and a slider. But Hagen is really working on that curveball. I think a curveball from him would be super fun to see because it's a totally different look than most of his pitches. So everybody's working on stuff. Everybody is. This whole organization, from a pitching standpoint, is adding pitches, is changing the way they look. It's mixing things in. The whole group is just doing creative things. And from an organizational standpoint, I don't think this organization has been in a better spot pitching-wise in a long, long time, Jeff. That is what I will say. And that is one of my biggest takeaways from the entire spring, is that the pitching development side of this organization is in an excellent spot with Brian Bannister, with Matt Zaleski, with Ethan Katz, with all of the other guys they have working on the pitching side.
Well, that's amazing, because that's exactly what you want to complement Mike Shirley's year in, year out great drafting of pitchers. So
Yeah,
that's
100%.
very exciting to hear.
The pitching is exciting for sure. Prospect-wise with pitching, some of the guys you talked to, or we both talked to, there was a lot of interesting guys that I caught up with and just kind of hearing about their pitches. Like I said, everybody's adding pitches. Literally everybody's adding pitches. Jordan Leisure is adding a splitter mixed in. Eric Adler talked about the kick change. Riley Gowan's talked about a new curveball that he's been working on. Up and down the organization, there's new pitches being added to the mix. Who are some of the guys pitching side, not aside from those big three, that kind of stood out to you or that you were just interested in learning more about?
Um, it's interesting. I didn't talk. I really focused more on hitting because I
Right.
knew you were going to be all over the
Yeah.
pitchers and kind of spoke their language. But it's funny. You and I both we bumped into Blake Larson and talked about
Yeah.
his recovery. Then I bumped into Kai Bush coming out of the weight room and posted a picture of that contraption that TJ pitchers have to wear for the first 2 months. It's pretty intimidating.
Yeah.
Um, and
Yeah,
then
Larson's good to mention while you mentioned that, because so for those, Blake Larson was the second round comp pick, so he was the third pick the White Sox made last year in the draft behind Caleb Bonnemer, ahead of Nick McLean. Larson got TJ. We talked to him. I had never met him before. I don't think neither of us have met him yet, because he didn't pitch last year in affiliated ball. He was in Arizona the whole time, was dealing with a different arm injury, and then just beginning of February, about a month ago, a little over a month ago, ended up having to get TJ. They decided ultimately for him, for his development, that it was better to get it now. He had to be through a bullpen, had his arm kind of acting up a little bit. Gets TJ. He's going to miss this whole season. Definitely a bummer for him. This is a guy who you can tell he's a young dude. He's definitely very much early in his development process coming out of high school. The talent is great, and I think that as much as it sucks, the way he throws, the velocity he throws out from such a young age, the whippiness of his arm, he was a guy that probably was going to get TJ at some point. Most guys are ultimately these days, as much as that sucks. So it's a bummer that he's going to miss his whole first professional season. But Larson is someone that I will still, regardless of injury, be very, very keyed in on come next year when he's getting back and seeing how his road to recovery goes, for sure.
yeah. So who else? I know we're getting low on time. Just briefly, who else jumped out at you? As far
Yeah, I'm trying to think of some of the other arms. I mean, I caught up with a lot of guys. There was definitely, just a lot of guys to check in with. I talked to Seth Keener a little bit, who I really enjoyed talking to. It sounds like his stuff is moving a lot more than he used to. He told me that, he just feels like movement profiles are just better. He's got a deeper slider than it used to, a little bit more of a, his slider was kind of his bread and butter in college. And I think he said he's getting back to the peak form of that slider. He's been working on a changeup as well, trying to kind of, figure out what a new version of a changeup looks like for him. I think that's really exciting. Everybody up and down. Zach Franklin is a guy I talked to a little bit, a name that's probably more under the radar. Relief pitcher, had a quietly really, really good season in Birmingham last year. Franklin added another changeup to his mix. He used to throw a splitter. He switched over to a changeup this year. The changeup's just continuing to run through the system. Eric Adler, another one who we've talked about him for a while. I kind of am excited to see what he looks like in the system, what he's kind of going to be, taking form in. He's going to be in Birmingham again, probably. I think he's going to be in Charlotte soon. Another guy who, could realistically get bullpen innings later this season for the White Sox as well.
And in a B game, we saw Lucas Gordon look really sharp throwing two
Lucas
shut.
Gordon has gotten really good reviews. Overall this offseason, he's getting really positive reviews, I think. It sounds like he's throwing really well. I saw him for a little bit. I didn't get to talk to him at all, but I saw him throw once. He threw yesterday or 2 days ago in a B game as well and got really good against the Dodgers and supposedly threw really well in that game. He's got really good reviews. I'm excited to see what Gordon looks like. That's another guy from the draft class, from the 2023 draft class, who made his way to Birmingham. What was he, in Winston last year where he finished up?
Yeah,
Is that
Winston.
right? And then I think he probably is in Winston again just because of the other arms in Birmingham, but he could easily be in Birmingham. 23 years old, college experience guy at a high level. I think Gordon is another guy that could very easily make his way to Birmingham this season, if not pretty early in the season, honestly. So another guy from that 2023 class to keep an eye on as well. There's so many other guys we could talk about. We will cut it here for now, but I think, it's the pitching is just exciting. For me, my conversation with Matt Zaleski, just kind of hearing about the logic of the pitching, the way that they're working this kick change in, the reasoning behind the kick change, right? The cutter that's become really common, the cutter kind of bridging the fastball with the slider, right? It's this bridge pitch that kind of has emerged in this offseason, right? The sinker is something that a lot of guys are starting to throw. A lot of the guys, particularly with less ride on their fastball, right? So with guys that have less vertical break, induced vertical break on their fastball, those are the guys kind of working on the sinker with. Say, hey, forget the fastball trying to get it to ride. If your fastball doesn't ride naturally and your arm movement is better for dropping, let's just focus on the sinker and get the horizontal movement instead. Scrap the vertical movement. Let's focus on the horizontal and let's make that our priority going forward. It's really fun. I think that baseball as a whole is going to start moving more away from the four seam fastball. And that's something that, like, the White Sox are embracing. They're embracing these cutters and these sinkers that can not replace a fastball, but change the look of a fastball, right? And make a
Right.
fastball harder and more complicated to read for hitters. And then the kick change thing is awesome. I'm going to save more talk on that because I'm really, at some point when I actually have the time, I'm really going to try to dive into this kick change and look at the numbers behind the pitch, look at the reasoning behind it, and look at all the different guys in the system that are starting to throw it, because there's a chance that a couple years from now, we look back and the White Sox were actually one of the teams to really make the kick change emerge at a high level, because you got guys all over the league now. Clay Holmes is throwing it. Now he's transitioning to a starter. We saw Andres Munoz of the Mariners throw a 92-mile-an-hour kick change, which is ridiculous. It's becoming a pitch. And Davis Martin and Brian Bannister, there's other guys that threw it, but Brian Bannister in general was one of the first minds to really push the kick change into baseball. And I think the White Sox organization are going to be at the forefront sooner than later of that pitch becoming a huge, huge deal in baseball.
What is the difference between a kick change and a standard change?
Yeah, so that's something that I would need to pull up even more information. But
In
basically,
25 words or less.
so it's a spiked version of a changeup. So it's going to have more movement like a sinker. So it's going to be faster, and it has a different type of. You basically kick the axis and the spin movement on it, where it's moving in a way. The way Davis Martin says it is moving sort of like a lefty slider, but it's a righty changeup. So it's super interesting. It's going to have somewhat of that slider spin to it, but it's also going to have a sinking drop to it like a changeup does.
Right.
Really unique pitch, really interesting. It's a supinator pitch, right? So it's not something that pronators throw. It's fascinating. It is super nerdy baseball stuff that I kind of still need to do my research on to fully get my head around, because I've seen it thrown, I've seen how it's thrown, but it's really unique. People can check out on my X page. I posted a picture of Gus Varland with throwing his kind of holding his kick change grip to see what it is, because it's a changeup grip, but it's got this finger spiked, right? So it's got one of the fingers up kind of and spiked on the ball. It's super cool stuff. This pitching is going to be exciting, Jeff. I'm excited to see. It's going to be ups and downs for sure. I'm not saying this pitching staff is up there with any of the best in baseball. It's still far from that. But I think in the next year or two, we're going to start to see the White Sox be a team that is putting up legit innings pitching every single day. And that's exciting at the very least, among everything else.
Oh, that's pretty cool. And we didn't have a chance to talk about it. I met him, but didn't have a chance to talk in depth with Brian Bannister's hitting counterpart, Ryan Fuller. Did you ever catch up with
I did
him?
not. I did not get the chance to catch up with Ryan Fuller, but I'm excited to see what that looks like, because the White Sox
Right.
haven't had a director of hitting like they've had the director of pitching in Bannister the past 2 years, right? So really excited to see organizationally what that level of Ryan Fuller being in looks like throughout the organization, and how the hitting kind
Yeah.
of, if there's trends with the hitters like there's trends with the pitchers now that we're starting to see.
Exactly. Exactly. That's going to be one of the big storylines this year for White Sox minor league baseball for sure.
100%. This was a lot. This was awesome. I had a great time in spring training. I'm glad we both got out there, Jeff. It was a blast. We've got so much more to talk about in the next few weeks. Make sure you're checking in at FutureSox on social media, the podcast, FutureSox Podcast. James and Ian are cooking. Jacob and Danny are cooking on hot takes and heaters. Me and Jeff and Dylan as well on the roundup. We're going to have a lot of fun this season. There is a lot of young talent to watch in this White Sox system. So stick around with us, and hopefully we'll make it worth your time throughout the next 6 months here of baseball. We're excited.
Yeah, and I guess one of the next things we'll be doing is looking at the lineups for each of the affiliates. It's about
Yeah,
time that that starts to crystallize.
we will learn the Charlotte and Birmingham rosters probably in 2 weeks or so from now, if not a little bit less even. So we will talk to you then for sure. And Future Sox Day for anybody in the Carolina area, the Kannapolis Winston Salem scrimmage is in April. Do you remember the date of that, Jeff?
Oh shoot!
I want to say it's April 2nd or 3rd, maybe.
It's whatever that Wednesday is in that first.
That's the second then. Yeah, that's the
Yep.
second. That Wednesday is the April 2nd. So April 2nd, for anybody in the Carolina area, Future Sox Day, Winston-Salem and Kannapolis will have a scrimmage for, to represent the lower levels and the excitement of the minor leagues. So definitely make sure to check that out. And we will talk to you next time on the Roundup. Thanks